Well, we kick off this morning taking a look at this deal that has been signed between South Africa and France, the cybercrime deal. And we are now joined by Professor of Sociology at the University of Johannesburg, Professor Patrick Bond. Professor Patrick Bond, good morning to you, sir. And as always, welcome to the show.
Salam alaikum. And yes, it's very good to be with you again.
Walaikum salam. Prof, let's talk about South Africa, the cyber crimes capacity, the capability, the skills, and all of this leading up to what we want to talk about, this deal that has been signed between South Africa and France.
The main point, like many such arrangements between different sort of security and investigative services, and the Financial Action Task Force back in February brought this to everybody's consciousness because of the grey listing of South Africa. The main point is to improve our own officials' ability to look at the various kinds of criminals and figure out how to stop them. And with cybercrime, it's so complex because the technology outruns these relatively slow-footed governments like our own quite rapidly. But it's not even South Africa at the top of the list. Usually we are at the top of the list for corporate crime, according to PwC. But now we're looking at cybercrime, particularly where phishing, the attempt to grab your passwords for especially bank accounts occurs. And that's actually most in the UK, and second, US, third, Canada, fourth, Australia. We rank fifth. After us comes Greece, and after that comes France, ironically. So they're not that strong teachers because they're also needing, I think, some support themselves. These are statistics that are just out in February from the name of I'll come back to you with the name of the company that does this rating system. It's not PwC, but I think a relatively reliable one. And so I think with Ronald Lamola, the Justice Minister, with the SIU and the Hawks, possibly also involving now DIRCO, that's a good group of people. But the big ones, of course, will be Treasury and the Reserve Bank, because they're the ones tasked with stopping money from leaving the country.
Well, in fact, I think you've answered part of the question as to why France, in a particular, that South Africa actually chose to sign this deal, because this can, as you mentioned, technology, it can get extremely technical, and when one looks at the nature of cyber crimes, I mean, these are highly sophisticated crimes, and this is exactly what South Africa is short of at this point in time. The skills to actually deal with the sophistication that is associated with cybercrime.
Yeah, I mean, cybercrime can occur particularly where there's a desperation to get your money out of South Africa, and that relates especially to those who are relatively wealthy. And I must say, those are often people who benefited from apartheid, and they have pale skins like mine. And so there's a sort of, desperation that we see. You can see it in the export of high income individuals who they're exporting their money because the exchange controls were relaxed. They can take 10 million rand a year. They can export pension funds up to 50% as of last year, but they can also export themselves. And so we're seeing an emigration. Now, with that, given that there are still residual exchange controls, Bitcoin and other cyber currencies suddenly look really attractive. And that's where a great deal of the scamming comes in with the cryptocurrencies. We had the case that's probably the worst case in the world, where two brothers, the KG brothers, who are young lads who just had a very good skill at selling their services in marketing Bitcoin. And then they've left with some $3.6 billion worth. What is that? It's close to 65 billion rand. And their names, Reis and Amir KG. And as far as I know, they still have not been traced. And there is a group in Dubai that's trying to buy off about 35 of the victims of that scam. But that's one of the very biggest. And just goes to show that if you're playing with Bitcoin, you're playing with fire. The actual price of Bitcoin during 2022 collapsed by 75%. So it may be worth looking at things that the Chinese have done. They banned cryptocurrencies, and now they're thinking about a central bank cryptocurrency that, like Zimbabwe, they're thinking of one as well, backed by gold. They've allegedly introduced it, but when I was there last month, I didn't find anyone who would really trust the Zimbabwe central bank. And that may be the wave of the future, is to take some of these out of the hands of the cowboys. A guy called Sam Bankman-Fried ran a very big one, and it went bankrupt earlier this year. He's in jail. And these are the sorts of questions, I think, whether from the French we're going to get a Monsieur Poirot, a very effective detective, or maybe an Inspector Clouseau, given that they rank pretty high on the list of victim countries as well, ranked number 7, whereas we're number 5th.
Yes, Prof. Also, interesting you mentioned grey listing, because it is clear that this has affected the investment climate in South Africa. And for a very, very long time now, South Africa has been under the radar as far as our capacity and our ability to deal with cybercrime, and how the disastrous impact this has actually had on our economy as a whole.
Well, I agree with you. It's not only cybercrime that the grey listing occurred for. There was drug money laundering, terrorist financing, because there have been some little small scale incidents. But the really big one, where I would say the Treasury and the Reserve Bank look really, really weak, is in monitoring and halting illicit financial flows. Now, that's essentially an ideological decision by especially the people around the current finance minister, Enoch Godongwana, but also his predecessors, Tito Mboweni, even Pravin Gordhan, even the radical economic transformation aligned minister Malusi Gigaba. He released exchange controls, as did Nhlanhla Nene. So you look back at these finance ministers, maybe even going back to Trevor Manuel, they were basically free marketeers. Their neoliberal agenda is essentially let markets run, and that means reduce the sort of exchange controls. The problem with that is that when you do that, up to 7% of your GDP evaporates, according to Treasury. So Treasury has a group, the Financial Intelligence Center, that's meant to look at this, and they are doing an impossible job, because there's really very little commitment, it seems, to enforcement of these exchange control regulations as judged by the Financial Action Task Force. So I must admit, I was pleased, maybe unique in South Africa, I was pleased that we were grey listed, for the reason that the Treasury and Reserve Bank really do need a club. They have been very lazy and asleep at the wheel and ideologically uncommitted to keeping the funds in the country, because for them, loosening exchange controls, attracting foreign investment, speculative flows, in addition to actual concrete investment, that's looks good on their statistics book. And to me, that's the sort of ruination of many African economies, where the especially big multinationals that do extractive industry profit and dividend and interest repatriation, that they take the money out. Now, right from the very top of their economy, Cyril Ramaphosa has been guilty of this, right? In Lonmin, where the Farlam Commission identified R1.5 billion that had gone to Bermuda, just an office staffed by just 2 people. It was a kind of clear tax dodge. He was also the chair of MTN when they were notorious along these lines. His own company, identified by the Panama Papers. And so in all these ways, we're getting signals from corporate South Africa, as I say, ranked number 1 in the world for economic crime and fraud during the 2010s. And Cyril Ramaphosa, who comes out of that environment, was perfectly happy to allow 4 trillion rand to escape the economy last year, when Enoch Godongwana reduced the exchange control. And then finally, at the end of the year, the Treasury started to put in a couple of laws that would begin to tighten up these systems. So I think it's one of the worst things in our economy. It's rarely talked about, because white people, rich people, they want to get their money out, and they don't want to talk about how it's really going in their favor to do so. As I say, 7% of GDP lost a year, according to Treasury. That's not my statistic. That's from the Financial Intelligence Center. So we really do need, I think, international assistance sometimes, like financial sanctions, a grey list, to get Treasury and Reserve Bank to get serious.
Yes, but also, Prof, you mentioned the illicit flow of funds and you speak about the Panama Papers. Now, we know for a very, very long time, we've heard about these havens, and we've seen so much money actually leave the country. But also in tackling cybercrime, the ability to bring that money back in the country. And this is a major issue. This is a major problem. If we go by with what had happened with the Guptas as well, we were not even able to bring them back. And forget the money, we couldn't even bring them back. So these are important issues to think about.
Oh, it's true, because on the one hand, we might get a little assistance from the French on tracking cybercrime and trying to prevent it and improving the systems. I think we'd all welcome any assistance, so long as the French aren't, putting backdoor viruses, all the kinds of things you expect these international, cyber experts to be able to do. That's often alleged of the Chinese, but there's so many hucksters and scammers. So on the one hand, it's good to have some potential alliances with even French government security officials. But on the other hand, the same forces, the French government is notorious. They have repeatedly controlled the IMF. Their finance ministers, Dominique Strauss-Kahn and Christine Lagarde, were part of the period in sort of liberalization. Strauss-Kahn not so bad, but certainly Lagarde, of liberalizing. And that means from the IMF, we get constant pressure for not only austerity to cut the budget after that $4.3 billion loan that was taken out in 2020, but in addition to let finance and markets flow freely. And I think that let's say, foot on the brake when you get the cybercrime results, and foot on the accelerator when they're pushing hard on the neoliberal agenda, means our car might maybe become a scorocoro. And this is one of the dilemmas when we basically lose sovereignty over our own financial, monetary, and currency relations. And so when the BRICS are coming in August to Santon, if maybe it's 4 presidents and one sits in Moscow and beams in, maybe that'll be the solution to the problem of the ICC arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. But whatever happens, there's huge expectations of a de-dollarization move in which these financial and currency and monetary arrangements might be rearranged. Now, I personally doubt anything will happen because we have such conservative and essentially pro-Western financial authorities in Treasury and the Reserve Bank, and even the DIRCO, so-called Sherpa, to this process. Anil Suklal said earlier this month, after the foreign ministers of the BRICS leaders met, he said, we didn't talk de-dollarization. It's not on our agenda. So I wouldn't put too much hope in the BRICS, but it is terribly important, isn't it, that we tighten exchange controls, make these financial action task force recommendations against our illicit financial flows, against the money laundering and terrorist financing, become a serious agenda that should override the neoliberal logic of deregulation.
Well, Prof, as always, an absolute pleasure engaging with you on these matters, and we do appreciate you taking time out talking to us right here on Salam Media this morning. All the best to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you in the end.
Professor Patrick Bond was us this morning, Professor of Sociology at the University of Johannesburg, against this deal that has been signed between South Africa and France to tackle cybercrime. The time is just gone, 8:19. We're going to go for a break. We come back and we will be taking a look at this ANC dispute with this High Court order to distribute deployment committee minutes.